The Sheikh had 30 seconds to close a $500 million deal when his translator vanished. Maya, a waitress juggling coffee cups for tips, set down her tray and said 4 words that changed everything. "I speak Arabic." What she did next with that phone call stunned the entire restaurant and saved a career-defining contract in under 60 seconds. Maya wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that deal. She was a 24-year-old linguistics student funding her degree by balancing 6 plates and a coffee pot in a 5-star Dubai restaurant where the staff are trained to be invisible. But when she saw the Sheikh fumbling with his phone, panic written across his face, she recognized all the signs of a disaster about to happen. The central question that night wasn't just how she spoke Arabic with such fluency. It was why a waitress who'd mastered 3 dialects chose to hide her gift in plain sight until the exact moment a billionaire needed a miracle. Her story begins 4 years earlier. In a cramped apartment in the Deira district of Old Dubai, where Maya shared a single room with 2 other women and a gecko that lived behind the water heater. The rent consumed 60% of her income from the restaurant. The rest went to tuition at the University of Dubai, where she was pursuing a degree in applied linguistics with a focus on Arabic dialectology, the study of how the same language fractures into distinct regional identities across the Middle East. But Maya wasn't studying Arabic from scratch. She'd grown up speaking it. Her father, a Filipino electrical engineer, had moved the family to Riyadh when Maya was 6 years old. For the next 12 years, she attended international schools where the hallways echoed with Egyptian gossip, Syrian jokes, and the guttural poetry of Gulf Arabic. Most children of expatriates picked up just enough to order shawarma. Maya absorbed the language like oxygen. By 14, she could code switch between Levantine, Egyptian, and Gulf dialects without hesitation, a skill that even native speakers found remarkable. Her friends called her a human Rosetta Stone. But when her father lost his job during the oil downturn of 2015, the family had to return to Manila. Maya was 18, freshly graduated from high school, fluent in 3 varieties of Arabic, and utterly unable to use any of them to save her family's collapsing finances. She watched her parents sell jewelry, borrow from relatives, postpone medical procedures. She made herself a promise. She would return to the Gulf, earn a degree that mattered, and build a life stable enough that no one in her family would ever feel that helpless again. Dubai was the obvious choice. The city ran on ambition and service workers, thousands of young people from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa who poured coffee, scrubbed floors, and kept the glistening machinery of luxury humming. Maya arrived on a student visa with $700 and a determination sharpened by desperation. She enrolled at the University of Dubai within 3 weeks, talked her way into a part-time waitressing job at an upscale restaurant near the financial district, and discovered the first truth of surviving as an invisible worker: never draw attention to yourself. The restaurant was called Al Nafara, a lavish establishment where business deals were sealed over $1,000 bottles of wine and where the clientele included oil executives, royal family members, and investment titans who treated the waitstaff like furniture. Maya learned to move soundlessly, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to smile without ever making eye contact that could be misinterpreted. She was good at it, too good. Her tips were excellent, and her supervisors trusted her with the VIP sections, the private alcoves where the real power players conducted their affairs. It was in one of those alcoves that she first noticed Sheikh Khalid bin Rashid Al Mansouri. He came in every Tuesday evening, always the same corner table with a view of the Burj Khalifa, always alone with his phone and a leather-bound notebook. He ordered the same meal, grilled hammer with lemon and herbs, and tipped exactly 20% regardless of the service. Maya had served him perhaps 30 times before she ever heard him speak more than a polite thank you. He wasn't arrogant like some of the other wealthy patrons. He was something rarer, genuinely preoccupied. His mind was always somewhere else, wrestling with numbers and negotiations that Maya could only guess at. She pieced together fragments from overheard conversations. Khalid was 45, the founder of a real estate development firm that had built some of the most iconic properties in the Gulf. He was respected, moderately feared, and currently in the final stages of a deal that would define his legacy, a $500 million joint venture with a consortium of Egyptian investors to develop a massive waterfront project on the Red Sea coast. The Egyptians had been negotiating for months, their demands shifting like desert sand. Every concession Khalid made was a calculation, every clause a battle. The final contract was scheduled to be signed after one last phone call to resolve outstanding terms. That call was set for a Tuesday evening. Maya knew nothing about it when she arrived for her shift at 4 o'clock, her linguistics textbook still open in her locker for the few minutes she could steal between dinner rushes. She was scheduled to work the main floor, not the VIP alcoves, because the restaurant was hosting a private engagement party that required extra hands. She spent the first hour arranging tables, polishing glasses, and practicing Levantine verb conjugations in her head for an upcoming exam. At 5:30, Sheikh Khalid arrived earlier than usual. He was accompanied by a man Maya recognized as his chief legal counsel, a sharp-featured Egyptian named Tayyik who always seemed to be on the verge of a panic attack. Khalid's usual calm had been replaced by a coiled tension. His jaw was tight. His fingers drummed the table. The translator who was supposed to join them had missed his flight from Abu Dhabi due to a sandstorm that had grounded all evening departures. A replacement was being sought, but time was slipping away. The Egyptian partners had made it clear, if the call didn't happen at precisely 7 o'clock, they would interpret it as a sign of bad faith and walk away. 6 months of negotiations, a $500 million deal, and Khalid's reputation, all hanging on a missing translator and a rapidly approaching deadline. Maya observed all of this from across the dining room while carrying a tray of champagne flutes. She recognized the dynamics immediately. She'd seen deals collapse before. She'd watched powerful men crumble under pressure, but she kept her head down and focused on her section because getting involved was not part of the job description. Then 7 o'clock arrived. Khalid's phone rang. The Egyptian investors were calling, and there was still no translator. The Sheikh answered, his voice strained as he tried to navigate the conversation in English, a language the Egyptian negotiators understood but disliked using for high-stakes legal discussions. Maya could hear fragments, confusion, frustration, the Egyptians threatening to postpone. 57 seconds into the call, Khalid's face went pale. The investors were losing patience. They wanted to speak in their native dialect to hash out the final terms properly, or there would be no deal. He had maybe 30 seconds before they hung up. Khalid scanned the room wildly, desperate for anyone who could help. His eyes passed over the waitstaff without registering them. And then Maya, heart-hammering, set down her tray. She walked toward his table. The words came out before fear could stop them. "I speak Arabic. I speak Arabic." The 3 words hung in the air of Al-Nafra's private alcove as Sheikh Khalid's eyes locked onto Maya's face, searching for the lie, the exaggeration, the catch. There was no time for any of it. The Egyptian lead negotiator's voice crackled through the phone speaker, sharp with irritation. "If you cannot properly discuss the terms, we will reconvene when you have a translator, perhaps next month." Khalid pressed the phone into Maya's palm. "Please," he whispered, with the desperate weight of someone watching $500 million evaporate. Maya pressed the phone to her ear and spoke. Not in the formal modern standard Arabic taught in classrooms, the stilted, bookish tongue that marked an outsider instantly, but in the thick, rhythmic cadence of Cairene colloquial, the dialect spoken in the streets and boardrooms of Egypt's capital. She greeted the negotiator by his full name, Farouk El-Masri, which she had overheard Tayyik mutter moments before. Her tone was warm but precise, the verbal equivalent of a firm handshake that says, "I belong in this conversation." The change on the other end was instantaneous. Farouk's suspicions softened into surprise. "You are Egyptian?" he asked. "No, sir," Maya replied, still in flawless Cairene, "but I have great respect for your dialect and your country's legal traditions. Sheikh Khalid has asked me to assist in the final points of your discussion. May we proceed?" There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Proceed," Farouk said. What followed was 57 seconds of verbal choreography that no one else in the room could fully follow. Maya listened as Farouk outlined 3 remaining sticking points: the penalty clause for construction delays, the revenue sharing ratio for the first 5 years of operation, and a seemingly minor addendum about dispute resolution jurisdiction. Each point had been debated for months. Each word carried legal implications that could shift millions of dollars in liability. Maya didn't just translate, she negotiated. When Farouk pushed on the penalty clause, she turned to Khalid and asked for his counter in rapid English, then rendered it into Arabic with the exact legal terminology a Cairo-trained lawyer would expect. When the revenue-sharing ratio became tangled in cross-cultural confusion, she paused both sides and clarified the misunderstanding in terms both men instantly understood, bridging not just language, but entire frameworks of business logic. But the real test came on the 3rd point, the dispute resolution addendum. Farouk spoke a phrase in rapid-fire Egyptian legalese that would have tripped up most native speakers from other Arab countries. Maya's ears caught something buried within it, the phrase, Tarkim fi Muhafazat al-Kahira, arbitration in Cairo Governorate. On the surface, it seemed standard, but Maya knew something that Sheikh Khalid's Gulf-trained lawyers might have missed. Egyptian arbitration law contained a specific provision, Article 17 of the Arbitration Act, that gave local courts extraordinary power to intervene in cases where one party claimed public policy violations. It was a backdoor that had been used repeatedly by Egyptian firms to drag foreign investors into years of litigation. If this wording remained, the entire Red Sea waterfront project could be held hostage. Maya's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. She covered the phone and turned to Khalid. There's a phrase in the dispute resolution language, it's dangerous. They're asking for Cairo-specific arbitration, which allows court intervention that could paralyze the project. You'll lose your leverage. Khalid's face shifted from relief to alarm. Sheikh, the legal counsel, stepped forward. That's standard language. Every Egyptian contract uses it. Every Egyptian contract that favors the Egyptian party uses it, Maya countered, her linguistics training suddenly intersecting with legal reality. The dialectal choice of words matters. If they wanted neutral arbitration, they would have said Tarkim Dawli International Arbitration. They chose local jurisdiction deliberately. Khalid stared at her for a beat, then nodded. Tell them we'll accept neutral international arbitration under UNCITIL rules, or there's no deal. Maya returned to the phone, still in her perfect Cairene, and delivered the counter. The silence on the other end stretched for 5 seconds. 10, Sheikh's face went pale. The entire $500 million negotiation was balanced on a knife's edge. Then Farouk laughed again, deeper this time, with something like respect. The Sheikh has found himself a remarkable translator. We agree. International arbitration it is. The deal stands. The call ended. Khalid al-Mansouri's $500 million legacy project was saved, and the woman who had saved it was already stepping back from the table, smoothing her server's apron as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But everything had changed. The alcove's air felt charged, electrically different. Khalid's chief legal counsel, Sheikh, was staring at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and something far colder. The way his fingers tightened around his pen suggested this was not the outcome he had anticipated. His eyes flickered toward the exit, then back to Maya, cataloging her face like evidence. Khalid rose from his chair. What is your name? His voice was hoarse. Maya Reyes, Miss Reyes. He stepped toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. How much do I owe you for what you just did? Anything you name is yours. Maya shook her head, already edging back toward the main dining room where her abandoned tray of champagne flutes was probably being cleared by another server. Just a good tip, she said, and the faint smile that crossed her face was genuine. That's all. She disappeared through the kitchen doors before Khalid could respond, before Sheikh could open his mouth, before any of the VIP guests could register what they had witnessed. Back among the stainless steel counters and shouted orders from Chef Pierre, Maya leaned against a refrigerator and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing. She looked at her reflection in the polished metal and saw a waitress who had just stepped so far out of her assigned role that there could be no going back. But the night, it turned out, was just getting started. 3 tables away from Khalid's alcove, a man in a grey suit had been watching the entire exchange. He was not a guest of the restaurant, not a business associate of any of the parties involved, and his presence at Al Nafara that evening was not coincidence. His name was Senior Inspector Omar Hassan of the Dubai Financial Audit Authority, an investigative body rarely mentioned in polite business circles because their work involved tracing the flows of illicit money through the Gulf's glittering real estate sector. He had been surveilling Sheikh for 3 months, building a case that the legal counsel was funneling privileged information to a rival developer with ties to an Egyptian business cartel. Omar had watched Maya approach the alcove with mild curiosity. He had watched her take the phone with genuine surprise, and he had watched her catch the arbitration clause with the sharp attention of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion he'd been nursing for weeks. Because Inspector Hassan knew something that neither Khalid, nor Sheikh, nor Maya herself understood yet. The Egyptian investors had never intended to close the deals smoothly. The arbitration clause was a deliberate trap, inserted at the last minute by Farouk's legal team at the suggestion of a confidential informant, a mole inside Khalid's own operation who had been paid to ensure the deal either collapsed or left Khalid vulnerable to future exploitation. Sheikh was that mole. The sandstorm that grounded the translator hadn't been a sandstorm at all. It had been a fabricated excuse, a timing mechanism to force exactly the kind of desperate, last-minute scramble that would allow the poisoned clause to slip through unnoticed. And the only thing that had stopped it was a 24-year-old waitress with a linguistics textbook and the perfect Cairene accent. Inspector Hassan closed his notebook and slipped out of the restaurant quietly. He had a report to file. But first, he needed to find out everything there was to know about Maya Reyes, the invisible worker who had just made herself very, very visible. By the next morning, 2 separate forces were converging on Maya's small apartment in Deira. The first was Sheikh Khalid's private security team, dispatched with instructions to locate and protect the woman who had saved his empire. The second was Inspector Hassan's investigative unit, which had flagged Maya as a person of interest in an ongoing financial crimes probe with international implications. Neither group was aware of the other's existence. Both believed they were racing against time, and in a high-rise office across the city, Sheikh sat at his desk, staring at a burner phone and calculating the cost of his next move. Maya Reyes had seen his face. She had spoken to the investors. And if she understood enough about Arabic legal terminology to catch the arbitration trap, she might understand enough to connect him to the conspiracy. She was no longer just a witness. She was a threat. The burner phone buzzed. A message in Arabic, "The girl, deal with her." The next phase of Maya's story, the phase that would take her from accidental hero to national news to the center of a criminal investigation, had already begun, and she hadn't even finished her shift. Burner phone went dark. Sheikh stared at the screen until the words burned into his vision, "Deal with her." He had expected this moment, had rehearsed it in his mind during sleepless nights when the guilt crept in, and he had to remind himself why he had sold out the man who trusted him most. But now that it was here, the instruction felt heavier than he had imagined. Maya Reyes had a name. She had a face. She was not a line item in a spreadsheet or an abstract threat to be managed. She was a student who worked double shifts and conjugated Levantine verbs in her spare moments. And now she was a loose end that his handlers wanted tied. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, a habit he had abandoned 5 years ago. The smoke curled toward the ceiling of his office, where the Burj Khalifa glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows. He thought about his wife, who believed he was still the principled lawyer she had married. He thought about his daughter, a first-year student at the American University of Sharjah, whose tuition was paid with money that had strings attached to very dangerous people. And he thought about Sheikh Khalid, who had promoted him from junior associate to chief legal counsel in 6 years, who had trusted him with the most sensitive negotiations, who had called him brother during the iftar dinners of Ramadan. Tayak had not set out to become a traitor. It happened gradually, the way most betrayals do. 3 years ago, his younger brother had fallen into debt with a Cairo-based syndicate that operated legitimate real estate fronts, but derived most of its power from money laundering and political corruption. The debt was $700,000. The syndicate offered Tayak a choice: work for us, or we collect from your brother's body. Tayak chose survival. He began feeding small pieces of information to the syndicate, then larger ones, until he was fully compromised. The arbitration clause trap was his masterpiece, a final act of sabotage that would have given the syndicate leverage over Khalid's empire indefinitely, but Maya Reyes had destroyed it in 57 seconds. Now the syndicate was demanding he clean up the mess personally. Tayak knew what that meant. He had seen what happened to people who failed them. A car accident. A sudden illness, a disappearance that police would never solve. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and tried to think clearly. There had to be another way, a way to warn her perhaps without implicating himself, a way to disappear with his family before the syndicate realized he had defected. But even as he formulated the thought, he knew it was fantasy. The syndicate had eyes everywhere. His driver reported to them. His secretary received a second salary from a shell company in the Caymans. The walls of his life were lined with surveillance. If he warned Maya, his family would pay the price. If he did nothing, Maya would pay the price. And if he succeeded in silencing her, he would cross a line from which there could be no return at all. The clock on his desk read 11:47 at night. Somewhere across the city, Maya Reyes was ending her shift, unaware that her name had just been added to a list of liabilities that needed to be erased. She had stayed late at the restaurant, helping the kitchen staff close down. Chef Pierre had insisted on toasting her with a glass of non-alcoholic champagne, his gruff exterior cracking long enough to call her extraordinary. Other servers had gathered around, pressing her for details of the phone call, marveling at the way she had stepped into a moment that would define her life. Maya had deflected their praise with practiced humility, but inside, a quiet thrill was building. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a faceless worker, not as an immigrant scraping by, but as someone whose skills mattered. The feeling lasted exactly until she stepped outside the service entrance and saw a car idling at the curb. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, the kind used by government officials and private security firms. As Maya emerged into the humid night air, the rear door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He was broad-shouldered, with the watchful stillness of someone trained in threat assessment. A second man remained inside, his silhouette barely visible. "Miss Reyes," the man said. It was not a question. "My name is Rashid. I work for Sheikh Khalid al-Mansouri. He would like to speak with you tonight." Maya's instincts screamed caution. Dubai was safe by global standards, but she had heard stories about wealthy men who believed their money entitled them to anything. She took a half-step backward toward the restaurant door. "It's late. I have an early shift tomorrow." Rashid's expression did not change. "The Sheikh insists. It concerns your safety. We have reason to believe you may be in danger." The word danger landed in her chest like a stone. Before she could respond, a second vehicle appeared at the far end of the alley, an unmarked white SUV that parked diagonal to the sedan, blocking any exit. 2 men emerged from it, both wearing the official identification badges of the Dubai Financial Audit Authority. One of them was Senior Inspector Omar Hassan. "Miss Reyes," Omar called out, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to intervening in complicated situations. "I'm afraid the Sheikh's security team will have to wait. You and I need to have a conversation first. Please step away from the vehicle." Rashid turned to face the inspector, his posture tightening. "This is a private security matter. You have no jurisdiction here." "On the contrary," Omar replied, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "Miss Reyes is now a material witness in an active criminal investigation involving fraud, conspiracy, and potential charges of treason against a UAE national. My jurisdiction is quite clear." The word treason hung in the alley's stagnant air. Maya's mind was racing, unable to process how a phone call about contract terms had escalated to this. She was a waitress. She was a student. she was nobody. And now two competing factions were arguing over her like she was evidence to be collected. Omar turned to her directly. His eyes were not unkind. "Miss Reyes, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand what's happening. The phone call you handled tonight, you caught something that was never supposed to be caught. An arbitration clause deliberately designed to give an Egyptian business cartel control over Sheikh Khalid's company. The man who inserted that clause, Tayyip El-Masri, is the Sheikh's legal counsel. He's been working for the cartel for years, and when you caught their trap, you became a threat to a network that has silenced people before." Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. "This is insane. I just translated a phone call." "You did more than translate," Omar said. "You recognized a legal trap that half a dozen corporate lawyers had missed. You exposed a conspiracy. And now the people behind that conspiracy know your name." Rashid stepped forward, his loyalty to his employer overriding his caution around law enforcement. "If what you're saying is true, Inspector, then Miss Reyes is in immediate danger. The Sheikh has the resources to protect her, private security, a safe location, whatever she needs. And the Sheikh has a mole in his organization who would know exactly where that safe location is within hours," Omar countered. "My team operates outside the commercial security apparatus. We can protect her without alerting the people who want her dead." The two men faced each other in the dim alley light, the standoff reflecting a larger tension that Maya could barely comprehend. She was the prize, the asset, the key to a case that stretched across international borders, and yet all she felt was the crushing weight of being seen in a world that punished visibility. It was then that her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something compelled her to glance at the screen. The message was in Arabic, just 3 words. "They know, run." It was from Tayyip. The burner phone he had used to receive his orders was now being used to send a warning, a final act of conscience from a man who had already damned himself. Maya stared at the screen, the puzzle pieces locking into place with sickening clarity. Tayyip had betrayed Khalid. Tayyip had been involved in the trap. And Tayyip, the man whose face she had seen at the alcove table, had just told her to run because something worse was coming. "Inspector," Maya said, her voice steadying with the cold focus of survival, "I think Tayyip just warned me, and if he's warning me, it means someone else has already been sent." Omar's expression hardened. He turned to Rashid. "We don't have time to debate jurisdiction. Your principal is compromised, and Miss Reyes is in active danger. We need to move her now." "Are you going to help or obstruct?" Rashid hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he spoke into a small microphone concealed in his sleeve. "Stand down. We're cooperating with DFAA. Secure a secondary location and prepare for extraction." He looked at Maya. "We'll keep you safe, Miss Reyes, on my life." Maya nodded, though her legs felt hollow. She was no longer just a waitress who spoke Arabic. She was a witness, a target, and the only person alive who could unravel a conspiracy that had infiltrated one of the most powerful companies in the Gulf. The next hours would determine whether she lived to tell that story or became another name in a case file, another immigrant worker erased by forces too big to fight. The two vehicles pulled out of the alley in convoy, Maya sandwiched between armed men who spoke in clipped radio codes, the city lights blurring past tinted windows. She watched the skyline recede through the glass, the Burj Khalifa, the financial district, the restaurants and hotels where invisible workers kept the machinery of luxury running. She had come to Dubai to build a stable life, to fund a degree, to lift her family from the wreckage of financial collapse. She had never imagined that a single act of courage would make her the center of a storm that would shake the foundations of Gulf real estate and expose a criminal enterprise spanning 3 countries. But the storm was only beginning, because as the convoy sped toward an undisclosed safe house, a different set of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A dark SUV, matching speed, following at a distance that was no coincidence. The syndicate had found her faster than anyone had predicted, and Tayyip's warning had arrived too late. The dark SUV accelerated. Within seconds, it had closed the gap from 50 meters to 20, its engine roaring through the empty industrial streets on the outskirts of Dubai. Rashid, seated beside Maya in the back of the sedan, spoke into his wrist microphone with the controlled urgency of a man who had spent 15 years in Emirati Special Forces. "We have a tail. Black Lexus, no plates. Prepare to execute diversion protocol Delta." The convoy split. The lead vehicle, carrying Inspector Omar and his team, peeled off toward the port district, while Rashid's sedan veered into a maze of warehouse alleyways. The Lexus hesitated for only a moment before choosing its target, the sedan. Maya gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. She had spent her entire adult life trying not to be seen. Now she was the only thing anyone was looking at. "We are drawing them into a controlled zone," Rashid explained, his voice calm but his eyes locked on the side mirror. "DFAA has a tactical unit positioned 3 kilometers ahead. We just need to stay alive for 3 minutes." The Lexus closed to 15 meters. Through the tinted glass, Maya could see the silhouette of a passenger raising something. A weapon, a recording device, she couldn't tell. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of Ahmed's mathematics exams, Layla's latest sketch of their grandmother's village, Omar's dream of medical school. She thought of all the reasons she had to survive this night. Then the world became a blur of light and sound. A DFAA tactical van burst from a side alley, slamming into the Lexus with a force that spun it sideways. 2 more vehicles boxed it in. Armed officers in tactical gear poured out, shouting commands in Arabic and English. The sedan never slowed. Rashid exhaled slowly, clear, proceeding to safe house. Maya looked back through the rear window. The scene shrank rapidly, the flashing lights receding into the darkness like a receding nightmare. But the nightmare, she understood now, was not over. It had merely paused long enough for her to understand how deep it ran. The safe house was a nondescript villa in a residential compound on the city's southern edge, far from the glittering towers of the financial district. Inside, Inspector Omar was waiting with a laptop, a printer that had been running non-stop, and a wall covered with photographs, bank records, and intercepted communications. The syndicate, he explained, was not just a criminal enterprise. It was an intricately woven network that had embedded operatives inside multiple Gulf corporations, using real estate as a vehicle for laundering billions of dollars. Tayek El-Masri was one of at least 12 compromised professionals across 5 countries. The arbitration clause trap that Maya had caught was part of a larger operation to gain leverage over sovereign wealth funds and royal family investments throughout the region. "You didn't just save a deal," Omar told her, laying out the documents on a wooden table. "You exposed the mechanism they were using to gain control." That arbitration clause, if it had gone through, the syndicate could have tied up the Sheikh's entire portfolio in Egyptian courts for years. They would have effectively seized his company through legal attrition, and he would never have known it was deliberate. Maya stared at the photographs, faces of men she had never met, yet whose lives had intersected with hers in a single moment of linguistic precision. "And Tayek, what happens to him?" Omar's expression flickered. "Tayek sent you that warning." "It was the first decent thing he's done in 3 years. Our units located him 2 hours ago at his apartment. He didn't resist. He's currently in custody, providing a full confession. His cooperation will dismantle the syndicate's Gulf operations entirely." The news landed with a complicated weight. Tayek had tried to destroy his employer. He had made Maya a target. And yet, at the final moment, he had chosen to warn her rather than let her die. The mathematics of redemption, Maya thought, were never clean. Morning arrived with the call Maya had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Sheikh Khalid al-Mansouri appeared via video link from his private residence, his face haggard from 36 hours of crisis management. His legal team had worked through the night to restructure the Egyptian deal with the arbitration clause now removed. The investors, Farouk El-Masri included, had been shocked to learn their own negotiator had been compromised by the syndicate. Farouk himself had called Khalid at dawn, apologizing profusely and pledging to root out any corruption within his own ranks. The $500 million Red Sea project was back on track, cleaner and stronger than before. But Khalid was not calling to discuss business. He was calling to address the woman who had saved his life's work. "Miss Reyes," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion that billionaires are rarely taught to express. "I am told you declined a reward." I am told you said just a good tip. I respect your humility, but I cannot accept that answer. You risked your life. You exposed a criminal network. You preserved an initiative that will employ thousands of people and generate prosperity across 3 countries. A tip is not sufficient. Maya shifted in her chair. The exhaustion of the past 2 days had stripped away her defenses. Sheikh Khalid, when I was 18, my father lost his job and we lost everything. I came to Dubai determined to rebuild. All I wanted was to earn a degree and give my siblings a chance. I never asked to be involved in any of this. That is precisely why you deserve more than you asked for, Khalid replied. Effective immediately, the Al-Mansouri Foundation will fully fund your remaining education. Additionally, your brother Ahmed will receive a scholarship for his mathematics program. Layla will be sponsored for art school of her choice. Omar's pre-medical studies will be covered through doctoral level. And you, Maya, will be offered a position as senior linguistic consultant for my company's international negotiations. The salary is generous, the title is real, and the work, I believe, will suit someone who speaks 3 dialects and thinks faster than any lawyer I have ever employed. Maya's throat constricted. She thought of her mother, who had sold her wedding jewelry to pay for a single semester of tuition. She thought of her father, who had worked 16-hour shifts and never complained. She thought of her grandmother, whose voice had always told her that knowledge was the only currency that could not be stolen. I accept, she whispered. Thank you, but the surprises were not finished. Inspector Omar, who had been listening from a corner of the room, stepped forward with one final revelation. The DFAA investigation had unearthed a detail that connected Maya's story to a much older wound. The syndicate that had targeted Khalid was the same organization that had triggered the oil price manipulation of 2015, the very event that had caused Maya's father to lose his engineering position and sent her family spiraling into poverty. The conspiracy that she had exposed tonight was the same one that had altered the course of her life 7 years earlier. In a very real sense, Omar said quietly, you just brought down the people who took everything from your family. Justice has a long memory, Miss Reyes. Sometimes it just needs the right translator. The words settled over Maya like a benediction. For years, she had carried the quiet shame of displacement, the sense that her family's suffering had been random, meaningless, the collateral damage of forces too vast to comprehend. Now she understood. The world was not random. It was interconnected, a web of actions and consequences, and she had just pulled on a thread that unraveled the very fabric that had once unraveled her. Her grandmother's lessons about healing, about the body's capacity to release what it held, resonated in a new dimension. She had not just saved a deal, she had closed a circle. 6 months later, Maya stood before a graduating class at the University of Dubai, delivering the commencement address as the first student in the university's history to receive a full professorship offer before completing her degree. Her research on Arabic dialectology and its applications in international law had already been published in 3 academic journals. The Al-Mansouri Foundation had established a permanent scholarship fund in her name for immigrant students pursuing linguistics, and on her desk in the faculty office, next to a photograph of her grandmother, sat a handwritten note from Sheikh Khalid. It read simply, "For the waitress who saved my empire and reminded me that true power wears an apron." Maya had kept the apron. It hung in her office as a reminder that invisibility was not a weakness, that heroes emerged from the places no one thought to look, and that the right words, spoken at the right moment, could change the course of history. She would spend the rest of her career teaching that principle to a new generation of students who, like her, had arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a fluency in languages the world had not yet learned to value. But the final twist in her story came not from the university, nor from the Al-Mansouri Company, nor from the DFAA. It came from Tayek El-Masri, who wrote her a letter from prison 1 year after his conviction. In it, he confessed something that no one else knew. The syndicate had ordered him to insert the arbitration clause, but they had also ordered him to ensure the translator did not arrive. The sandstorm was real, but Tayek could have booked the translator on an earlier flight and chose not to. He had wanted Khalid to fail, And yet, in that failure, he had created the exact conditions for Maya to succeed. The trap he set had become the stage for her revelation. "I could have stopped you," he wrote, "but you would have remained invisible forever. Instead, I made you the only person who could save him. I meant to destroy, I ended up creating." There is a verse in the Quran that says they plotted, and Allah is the best of planners. I have no right to invoke scripture after what I have done, but I cannot help but see it. The waitress was always the plan. Maya folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She did not forgive Tayyik. She did not need to. But she understood, with a clarity that had grown sharper over time, that the world was a web of unintended consequences, and that sometimes the greatest gifts arrived in the hands of those who had meant to harm us. The challenge was not to understand why. The challenge was to be ready when the phone rang and the call required a voice you never knew you had. And that is the story of Maya Reyes, the waitress who saved a $500 million deal in 60 seconds and brought down a criminal empire in the process. But before we close, there is one final detail you should know, something that even Maya did not discover until years later. It concerns her grandmother, the woman who first taught her that every dialect carries a hidden history, that language is never just words, but a map of power and survival. Years after the events in Dubai, Maya was researching old family documents when she found a letter written by her grandmother in 1962. It was addressed to a Cairo law firm, seeking advice on an employment dispute involving a British oil company that had refused to honor contracts with local workers. The letter was written in meticulous Cairene legal Arabic, the very same dialect Maya would later use to catch the arbitration clause that brought down the syndicate. Her grandmother had never studied law. She had learned the language of contracts from her own father, a court translator during the colonial era. The knowledge passed through 3 generations, lying dormant, waiting for the exact moment it would be needed. Maya had not just inherited a skill, she had inherited a resistance. This story challenges everything we assume about who holds expertise and where power truly resides. The world trains us to look for brilliance in boardrooms and credentials and corner offices, but Maya was clearing plates and refilling water glasses when the moment arrived. She had every reason to stay silent, to pretend she had not understood the Arabic being spoken, to protect herself from exactly the danger that followed. Instead, she spoke, and in doing so, she reminded us that heroism is rarely prepared. It is simply recognized and then refused to be ignored. So the next time you're in a restaurant or a hotel lobby or an airport terminal, look at the people whose job is to be invisible. The man running your coffee, the woman folding towels behind the front desk, the student balancing a tray with a textbook tucked beneath it. You have no idea what languages they speak, what histories they carry, what grandmothers whispered wisdom into their ears decades ago. And you have no idea whether today might be the day they step onto your stage and save everything you were about to lose. If this story stayed with you, hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories the world overlooks, the invisible workers, the accidental heroes, the moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their skills have value, even if no one has recognized them yet. And tell us in the comments, when has a stranger stepped into your life at exactly the right moment? We read every single one. Thank you for watching. Stay ready, because the call might come when you least expect it.